"What in the hell is this supposed to be, old man?" The voice cut through the dry desert air, sharp and serrated like broken glass. It belonged to Colonel Marcus Vance, a man whose immaculate uniform and razor-sharp creases seemed to defy the oppressive heat of the Fort Irwin training range. He stood with his hands on his hips, his posture a perfect pyramid of institutional arrogance, staring down at the figure seated on a simple wooden stool. The old man didn't look up immediately. He was busy, his gnarled hands working a soft, oil-stained cloth along the barrel of a rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum. The stock was dark walnut, worn smooth and glossy in the places where a cheek, a shoulder, and a hand had rested for countless hours over countless years. The action was a Mauser-style bolt, and the scope was long and slender, lacking the bulky knobs and digital displays of the modern optics lining the firing positions on either side of him. Colonel Vance took a step closer, his polished desert boots crunching on the gravel with deliberate force. "I asked you a question, Pops. This is the Advanced Marksmanship and Technology range. The key word there is technology. That thing you're caressing looks like you stole it from a VFW Hall display case." A few of the younger snipers, clad in the latest digital camouflage and surrounded by more electronics than a Best Buy, snickered. They were Vance's boys, a new generation of warriors who could calculate windage and Coriolis effect with a button press on their ballistic computers. They saw the old man as Vance did, a relic, a piece of living history that had wandered into the wrong exhibit. Finally, the old man paused his work. He looked up, and for the first time, Vance got a clear look at his eyes. They were a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a winter sky, and they seemed to absorb the harsh sunlight without reflecting any of it. They were calm, patient, and held a depth that made the colonel feel strangely scrutinized, as if he were the one being evaluated. "It's a rifle," the old man said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, with a faint drawl that hinted at somewhere in the rolling hills of Appalachia. "A rifle," Vance repeated, drawing the words out with mocking slowness. He gestured expansively at the state-of-the-art M2010 and Barrett 50 caliber rifles arrayed down the line. "Those are rifles. That," he pointed a finger at the wooden antique, "is a fire hazard. I'm the commander of this training battalion. My men are qualifying today on targets out to 2,000 meters. I don't have time for whatever geriatric field trip you've wandered in on. Show me your credentials and your range authorization." The old man slowly, deliberately, reached into the pocket of his simple canvas jacket. He wore no uniform, just faded jeans and a plain gray shirt that had seen better decades. He pulled out a worn leather wallet and from it, a laminated card. It was an old-style Department of Defense identification card, the kind they hadn't issued in 30 years. The photo was of a much younger man with the same pale eyes, but with a hardness around the jaw that had since been softened by time. The name read, Jedediah Stone. Underneath, his status was listed simply as consultant. Vance snatched the card. He squinted at it, a smirk playing on his lips. Consultant? Consultant for what? The Historical Society? This thing's expired. See the date? 1995. He tossed the card back onto the old man's lap. "This isn't a nursing home outing. I want you and your musket off my range in 5 minutes, or I'll have the MPs escort you." "It's still valid," Jedediah Stone said, his voice unchanging. He picked up the card and placed it carefully back in his wallet. He didn't offer any further explanation. He didn't argue. He simply picked up his oilcloth and returned to polishing the rifle's bolt, the smooth shick-shick of the metal being worked the only sound he made. This infuriating calm was like fuel on the fire of Vance's temper. He was a man accustomed to immediate, unquestioning obedience. This quiet, immovable old man was a boulder in the stream of his authority, and it was making him look foolish in front of his troops. "Did you hear me?" Vance's voice rose, cracking with impatience. "I gave you an order, old-timer. Pack your junk and get out." Now, from a few firing positions down, a young soldier, Private First Class Miller, watched the exchange with a growing sense of unease. Miller was new to the unit, still trying to learn the ropes, but he'd been raised by his grandfather, a Vietnam vet who carried a quiet dignity much like the old man's. He saw the way Colonel Vance was puffing up his chest, performing for the audience of young soldiers. He also saw the way the old man, Jed, handled his weapon. It wasn't the clumsy fumbling of a confused senior, It was a deep, ingrained familiarity, a connection between man and tool that Miller had only ever seen in the most seasoned instructors. The movements were economical, precise, and utterly confident. Vance, seeing he was being ignored, took it a step further. He strode forward and reached out, his hand hovering over the ancient rifle. "Maybe you're hard of hearing. Let me help you pack." Before his fingers could touch the walnut stock, Jed's hand shot out. It wasn't fast, but it was unavoidable. It didn't grab Vance's wrist, it simply covered it. The old man's grip was surprisingly firm, the skin on his hand like old leather wrapped around steel cables. His pale blue eyes locked onto the colonel's. "I wouldn't," Jed said. The voice was still quiet, but it had an edge now, a low vibration that sent a reflexive shiver down Vance's spine. For a fleeting second, the colonel felt a primal jolt of fear, a lizard brain instinct that screamed he was touching something far more dangerous than he understood. He snatched his hand back as if burned. The public nature of the confrontation forced him to double down. His face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "That's it. You're done. Assaulting an officer. I'm having you arrested." He turned to his senior non-commissioned officer, a master sergeant who was watching with a carefully neutral expression. "Master Sergeant, get the MPs on the horn. I want this man detained." The master sergeant nodded, pulling out his radio. "Roger that, sir." Jedediah Stone sighed, a soft, weary sound. He released the rifle and let his hands rest on his knees. He looked down the range, at the distant steel targets shimmering in the heat haze. It was a look of profound disappointment, not for himself, but for the scene the colonel was creating. PFC Miller felt a knot of cold dread in his stomach. This was wrong. Utterly and completely wrong. He didn't know who the old man was, but he knew he wasn't a threat. He was something else. Miller looked at the rifle case sitting by the old man's stool. It was battered canvas and leather, secured with brass buckles. On its side, almost completely faded, was a small, stenciled emblem, a trident, crossed with an old flintlock pistol and a cutlass. It wasn't a standard seal trident. It was older, different. On a desperate impulse, while all eyes were on the colonel berating the master sergeant for not getting the MPs there yesterday, Miller ducked behind a stack of ammunition cans. He pulled out his personal cell phone, his fingers trembling slightly. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but he knew he had to do something. He quickly typed the description of the strange insignia into a search engine. The results were sparse, most leading to dead ends or enthusiast forums. But one link, buried deep, led to a restricted access historical military archive. Most of the page was classified, but the insignia was there. It was the original crest of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the unit more commonly known as SEAL Team 6. It was the plank owner's crest, used only by its founding members in the early 1980s. Miller's blood ran cold. This wasn't just some old veteran. This man was a piece of living, breathing special operations history. Below the image, there was a single, unclassified contact number listed for historical inquiries and protocol. It was probably a deadline to a Pentagon basement, but it was the only thing he had. His heart pounding, Miller dialed the number. He expected a recording, an automated menu. Instead, a real human voice answered on the first ring, a woman's voice, sharp and professional. "Continuity office. State your purpose." Miller stammered, whispering into the phone. My name is PFC Miller. I'm at Fort Irwin, Range 14. There's an old man here, a civilian, and Colonel Vance is trying to have him arrested. The thing is, ma'am, he has a rifle case with an old crest on it. A trident with a pistol. Describe the man." The voice interrupted, suddenly devoid of its bureaucratic tone. It was now intensely focused. "Old. Maybe 75? Pale blue eyes. Gray hair. He's got an old ID. Name's Jedediah Stone." The line went completely silent for a full 5 seconds. Miller thought he'd been disconnected. Then the woman's voice came back, tight with a mixture of shock and urgency. "Private, listen to me very carefully. Do not hang up this phone. What is Colonel Vance's full name?" "Marcus Vance, ma'am. Keep this line open. Do not let anyone see you. I am routing this call. Stand by." Miller could hear frantic, muffled voices in the background, then the distinct sound of another phone being picked up. A new voice came on the line, a man this time, deep and resonant with authority. "This is General Thompson. Son, are you still there? Miller nearly dropped the phone. A four-star general. He was talking to a four-star general. Why, yes, sir. General. PFC Miller. Son, I need you to tell me exactly what is happening. Is the man, Mr. Stone, in any physical danger? The MPs are on their way, sir. Colonel Vance says he's having him arrested for assaulting an officer. But he didn't, sir. He just stopped the colonel from touching his rifle. Understood, Private. The general's voice was grim. You've done the right thing. Now, I need you to stay out of sight. We are inbound. I am giving you a direct order to observe and report only. Do not engage. Do you understand me? Inbound, sir. Miller whispered, confused. Just keep your eyes open, son. And for God's sake, make sure nobody lays a hand on that man. The line went dead. Miller slid the phone back into his pocket, his mind reeling. Inbound. What did that mean? He peeked back over the ammo cans. Colonel Vance was now pacing back and forth in front of Jed, who remained seated, his posture one of infinite patience. The distant wail of sirens was growing louder. The MPs were close. Your little sit-in is over, Grandpa, Vance sneered, hearing the sirens. You're about to learn a very hard lesson about respecting the chain of command. You might have gotten away with this kind of insubordination back in your day, but this is a modern army. We have rules. Jedediah Stone looked at the colonel, and a flicker of something that might have been pity crossed his features. The rules haven't changed as much as you think, son. Respect is earned, not issued with your rank. The words seemed to infuriate Vance even more. He was about to retort when a new sound began to intrude, a low, rhythmic whump 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 that quickly grew into a deafening roar. Every head on the range, including Vance's, turned skyward. 2 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters were descending on the range, not circling to land at the designated pad, but coming straight down into the dusty overflow area 50 yards away. They were unmarked, painted a flat, non-reflective black. As they touched down, kicking up a blinding storm of sand and gravel, a convoy of black, government-plated SUVs that had seemingly appeared from nowhere screeched to a halt on the access road, blocking the arriving MP vehicle. Doors flew open. Men in sharp suits and earpieces emerged from the SUVs, establishing a perimeter. The side door of the lead Black Hawk slid open, and a figure stepped out, ducking under the still-spinning rotors. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore the crisp operational camouflage pattern of the Army combat uniform. On his collar and patrol cap were the 4 silver stars of a full general. It was General Thompson, in the flesh. He strode from the helicopter with a purpose that scattered pebbles in his wake, his eyes fixed, his jaw set like granite. Colonel Vance's jaw dropped. He snapped into the most rigid salute of his life. General Thompson. Sir. An unexpected honor. I wasn't aware you were visiting Irwin today. General Thompson didn't slow down. He didn't look at Vance. He didn't acknowledge his salute or his existence. He walked past the colonel as if he were a piece of range equipment, his gaze locked on the seated old man. The entire range was frozen in stunned, absolute silence, broken only by the winding down whine of the helicopter turbines. The general came to a halt directly in front of Jedediah Stone's wooden stool. Jed looked up, his pale eyes meeting the general's. He gave a slow, small nod. And then the impossible happened. General David Thompson, commander of the entire region, a man who reported directly to the Pentagon, snapped his heels together and rendered the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise salute any soldier on that range had ever witnessed. It was not the perfunctory gesture offered to a superior. It was an act of profound, almost reverent respect. He held the salute, his arm rigid, his expression deadly serious. Mr. Stone. Sir. I apologize for the delay. I came as soon as I heard. Jedediah Stone slowly, with the stiffness of old age, pushed himself to his feet. He did not return the salute. As a civilian, he wasn't required to. Instead, he reached out and gently touched the general's arm. At ease, David. No need for all this fuss. The general dropped his salute but remained at a perfect position of attention. With all due respect, sir, there is every need. He finally turned, and the full weight of his 4-star fury fell upon Colonel Vance. Vance, who had been standing there with his own salute frozen in midair, looking utterly bewildered, let his arm drop to his side. Colonel Vance. The general's voice was dangerously quiet, a cold, lethal whisper that carried across the silent range. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" Vance was pale, his parade ground confidence completely evaporated. "Sir, he is a civilian, trespassing on a live-fire range with an unauthorized weapon and expired credentials. He was insubordinate, and—" "Colonel," Thompson cut him off, the word like a gunshot. "You are the commander of a training battalion. You are responsible for teaching the next generation of American warfighters. And the most important lesson, the one that underpins every single thing we do, is respect. You, sir, have failed that lesson in a way that I have not witnessed in my 35 years of service." The general took a step towards Vance, who involuntarily took a step back. "You stand on a range designed to create the deadliest marksman in the world. And you chose to humiliate the man who wrote the book. Not figuratively, Colonel. Literally. The original sniper field manual, the one every doctrine since has been based on, was derived from the after-action reports he wrote. Reports he wrote with blood on his hands, in jungles and mountains you've only ever seen on a simulator." He turned and gestured back towards Jed. "This is Jedediah Stone. To the history books, he doesn't exist. His records are sealed under a classification level so high that it would probably give you a nosebleed to even read its title. But to the few who know, he is a legend. A founding member of the unit that became SEAL Team 6. Before that, he was MACV-SOG. He ran reconnaissance missions so deep into enemy territory that they were officially denied. He hunted men whose names you wouldn't be cleared to hear." Thompson's voice began to rise, filled with a righteous anger that made the air crackle. "You mocked his rifle. Colonel, that is not just a rifle. That is a Winchester Model 70, chambered in 30-06. That specific rifle was presented to him by the President of the United States in a ceremony that never happened, for an action that officially never took place. With that rifle, he made a shot at over 1,200 yards, in a monsoon, to save a downed pilot who would later become a chairman of the Joint Chiefs. With that rifle, he held off an entire enemy platoon for 72 hours, alone, protecting a compromised intelligence asset. The stock you called a fire hazard has notches in it, Colonel. Not for kills, for the American lives he saved with it. Each one a story of heroism you could not even begin to comprehend." He jabbed a finger at Vance's chest. "You saw an old man. I see the operator they called the Ghost. They called him that because he could move through the most hostile terrain on Earth, and the only sign he was ever there was the high-value target who suddenly stopped breathing. He trained the first generation of Tier 1 snipers. The men he taught went on to become the heroes of Mogadishu, of Afghanistan, of Iraq. Their skill, their legacy, their very survival, started with the lessons they learned from this man. Every soldier on the range was listening, their mouths agape. PFC Miller, still hiding behind the ammo cans, felt a surge of pure, unadulterated awe. He was witnessing the unveiling of a titan. The general wasn't finished. He lowered his voice again, making it even more menacing. His ID card says consultant because there is no official rank high enough or a title appropriate enough to describe what he is to the special operations community. That card, which you so arrogantly dismissed, is his access to any military installation on the planet, at any time, with no questions asked. The date is irrelevant. It's a lifetime pass. When you saw that card, you should have offered him your command, your weapon, your very life if he asked for it. Instead, you threatened him. You called the MPs on a man whose name is spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the halls of Sockham. You, Colonel, are a disgrace. Colonel Vance was ashen, his body trembling. All the arrogance, all the swagger, had been sandblasted away, leaving behind a raw, terrified man. General, sir, I didn't know. You didn't know? Thompson roared, the sound echoing off the distant mountains. That's the whole point. You are not supposed to know. You are supposed to see a veteran, an elder, a man who has clearly served his country, and afford him a baseline of human dignity and respect. You judged him on his appearance, on the age of his equipment, because you are a shallow, arrogant fool who thinks warfare is won with fancy gadgets and new camouflage patterns. You think technology makes a warrior. You are wrong. The warrior makes the warrior. And you have just insulted one of a handful of the greatest warriors this nation has ever produced. General Thompson paused, taking a deep, steadying breath. He looked past Vance to the master sergeant, who was standing ramrod straight. "Master Sergeant, as of this moment, you are in command of this battalion." The colonel is relieved of his command, effective immediately. He will be escorted to my helicopter. He is to speak to no one. His career in the United States Army is over. He will be processed for immediate retirement at the lowest possible rank that his time in service allows. I will personally see to it. He turned back to Vance one last time. "You are dismissed. Get out of my sight." Vance, utterly broken, gave a weak, pathetic nod. He couldn't even manage a verbal response. He turned and walked, stiff-legged like a robot, towards the waiting Black Hawk. His head hung in utter shame. The men in suits met him halfway and guided him aboard. The range was still silent. General Thompson's gaze swept over the young snipers, who were now looking at Jedediah Stone with something approaching religious awe. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," the general said, his voice now calm, that of a teacher. "The man you see before you embodies the quiet professionalism that you should all aspire to. He has done more for this country than we will ever know, and he has never once asked for a shred of recognition. He is the substance, not the shadow. Remember that." He turned back to Jed. "Sir, I am truly sorry for the reception you received." Jedediah Stone finally spoke, his voice gentle. "He's just a boy, David, full of piss and vinegar. The Army needs men like that. They just need a little guidance. A little humility." He looked at the general. "Don't ruin him. Teach him." The general looked taken aback by the old man's grace. He considered the request for a long moment, his respect for Jed clearly warring with his fury at Vance. Finally, he nodded slowly. "As you wish, sir. I'll reconsider his final disposition. But he will be taught a lesson in humility he will never forget." "That's all anyone can ask," Jed said. He then looked down at his rifle, a small smile touching his lips. "But since we're making all this racket, I'd hate to have wasted a trip. Mind if I take a shot?" A wide grin broke out on General Thompson's face. "Sir, it would be the honor of my life to spot for you." The general himself retrieved Jed's spotting scope, an old, brass and leather affair that looked as ancient as the rifle, and set it up next to the old man's stool. Jed sat down, the movements fluid and practiced. He settled the rifle onto a simple sandbag, the same kind soldiers had used for a century. He didn't have a weather meter or a ballistic computer. "What's the distance, David?" Jed asked, squinting downrange. "Target's at 1,950 meters, sir," the master sergeant called out, having lasered it for the other snipers earlier. It was a shot that even the best-equipped teams had been struggling with all morning due to a tricky, shifting crosswind. Jed nodded. He didn't seem concerned. He closed his eyes for a moment, and PFC Miller, watching from his hiding spot, swore he could see the old man's head tilt slightly, as if he were feeling the wind on his skin, tasting the air. He opened his eyes, worked the smooth bolt action, chambering around, and settled his cheek against the worn walnut stock. His breathing was slow and even. The world seemed to hold its breath with him. He made a minuscule adjustment to the scope's vintage dials. He took one last breath, let half of it out, and the range was rocked by a deep, resonant boom. It was a different sound from the sharp crack of the modern rifles. It was richer, more powerful. Everyone watched the vapor trail. It seemed to hang in the air for an eternity, arcing gracefully towards the distant, shimmering target. Then, a full 3 seconds later, came the unmistakable, deeply satisfying ping of lead hitting steel. A perfect center mass shot. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the young soldiers on the line. It wasn't protocol, but nobody cared. The master sergeant was grinning from ear to ear. General Thompson looked through the spotting scope and just shook his head in disbelief, a look of pure wonder on his face. Jedediah Stone said nothing. He simply worked the bolt, ejecting the spent brass casing, which spun through the air in a perfect, gleaming arc. He caught it in his palm before it hit the ground. He looked at the still warm brass, then calmly placed it in his pocket. He began to clean his rifle, his work done. Later, as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, the Black Hawks and the SUVs were gone. Colonel Vance was gone. The range was quiet. PFC Miller finally worked up the courage to approach the old man, who was packing his gear. "Sir," Miller said, his voice barely a whisper. Jed looked up, his pale eyes kind. "Yes, son. I was the one who made the call. I hope I didn't overstep. Jedediah Stone looked at the young private for a long moment. He saw the earnestness, the integrity in his eyes. He reached out and placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Miller's shoulder. Son, in this world, there's a time to follow orders, and there's a time to do what's right. You did what was right. You showed moral courage. That's a rarer thing than physical courage, and it's far more valuable. Don't ever lose it. Jed finished packing his old rifle case, buckled the brass clasps, and stood up. He looked out over the vast, empty desert. The tools change, he said, more to himself than to Miller. The uniforms, the ranks, the technology, it all changes. But the soldier doesn't. The heart of a warrior, the need for humility, for respect, for courage, that's timeless. He gave Miller a final nod and started walking towards an old, dusty Ford pickup truck parked at the edge of the lot, a vehicle so inconspicuous that no one had even noticed it. He moved without a sound, and in the fading light, he seemed to almost dissolve into the landscape, becoming a ghost once more. The story of that day on Range 14 became the stuff of legend at Fort Irwin. It was a story told in whispers, from grizzled NCOs to fresh-faced privates, a cautionary tale about arrogance and a powerful lesson about the quiet giants who still walk among us. Colonel Vance was never seen again, reassigned to a remote post in Alaska to reevaluate his leadership philosophy. PFC Miller received a quiet promotion and a recommendation for Ranger School from an anonymous sponsor high up the chain of command. And the lesson lingered, far more impactful than any training manual. It taught them that a warrior's true measure isn't in the technology they carry or the rank on their collar, but in the quiet dignity of their service and the respect they show to those who came before. It's a powerful reminder that the most important stories are often hidden behind a weathered face and a pair of old, pale eyes. And if you found this one as inspiring as we did, be sure to follow our channel for more stories that honor the unspoken heroes and their timeless legacies.